Well, next on the program, a powerful and influential mix of African and Caribbean leaders, global economists, investors, and business innovators have in the last 4 days gathered in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, for the 32nd annual meeting of the African Export-Import Bank, that's Afrieximbank. Well, amongst them is the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Percival Noel James Patterson, popularly known as PJ Patterson, with the theme Building the Future of Decades of Resilience, a high-level forum focused on accelerating trade, investment, and innovation across Africa and, of course, beyond. PJ Patterson has been at the forefront of calls for an unprecedented economic alliance between Africa and the Caribbean to forge what he termed Global Africa's path to prosperity. Well, as he delivered a keynote address at the 32nd annual meeting of the African Export-Import Bank, Afrieximbank. How can Nigeria, that's the question, and Jamaica leverage on the former Prime Minister's visit to strengthen political, social, and economic ties with Jamaica? Well, joining us now to take a look at the opportunities open to both countries is PJ Patterson, the 6th Prime Minister of Jamaica. Glad to have you join us on the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're talking offset, and I was asking, you were Jamaica's 6th Prime Minister from 1992 to 2006, making it the longest-serving Prime Minister in Jamaica's history. Currently, you hold the position of statesman in residence in PJ Patterson Institute for African Caribbean Advocacy at the University of the West Indies. How did you manage to be the Prime Minister, the longest-serving? What was it? What was the trick? What was your selling point, as it were?
I wouldn't like to regard it as a trick, but it was based largely on the apprenticeship which I served under the first Premier of Jamaica, Norman Washington Manley. And for several years, I was the Deputy Prime Minister to the government led by Michael Manley. As a result of that, I had accumulated quite a bit of political experience, both in terms of organizational skills and in governance. And I was able to apply them to win unprecedented 3 terms as Prime Minister and 4th consecutive terms for the party to which I belong and which I eventually had the honor to lead.
That was quite interesting. This advocacy, how reaching would you say your advocacy is or has gone, and what are the areas you think still need strengthening?
Since my retirement, I was invited by the University of the West Indies to head as statesman in residence an institute which concentrated on African Caribbean advocacy. And that meant, among other things, first of all, support for the movement for reparative justice as we seek to get reparations and redress for the iniquities that we suffered during the time of slavery, and which has left a lasting legacy of problems and concerns which still haunt us today, particularly in the fields of health and education. But we also are not confined to looking at the past, but to recognize that there is much that unites us, both in terms of experiences and how we face the new challenges which arise in the world today by us in the Caribbean, the 6th region of Africa, working with the 5 regions to constitute global Africa for the advancement of people of African origin and African descent all over the world. And that really is perpetuating the visionary inspiration provided by Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and which also contributed to the emergence of people like Kwame Nkrumah, who was among the first leaders in independent Africa to preach the message of unity, of purpose, and of action. And we therefore seek to achieve this in a wide range of fields, in cultural exchanges, in academic learning, but particularly in areas of economic interest. And we're talking about trade, investment, tourism, and of course we will, I'm sure, have a chance of discussing it more fully, technology.
Okay, because I know you have an AI hub. We'll come to that, and we'll come to what you talked about, a movement. In fact, I'll quote what you did say at the Afrieximbank conference. We'll talk about that. But you're calling for an unprecedented economic alliance between Africa and Caribbean to forge what you termed, just like you mentioned, Global Africa's path to prosperity. In fact, you talk about an economic powerhouse. So break this down. What are you driving at? What form this will take? And then how achievable this is?
It has to begin with an appreciation that the existing world order, which emerged after the last World War, was neither designed by us or for us. Now that we are sovereign countries in our own right, we have a compelling obligation to work together to changing that framework to make it inclusive of countries, now nations, which were former colonies and subject to imperial exploitation. While we're doing that, we have to forge a common alliance so that in all the fora, whether it is the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, or dealing with the multilateral institutions such as the IMF or the World Bank, we present our collective interests together as one. And we also have to use our sovereign power to develop relationships which are collaborative, which pool together our resources, natural resources, and very importantly, our human resources. Now, I'm not going to suggest it can be done overnight, but the process has to begin. And we have to look at particular areas and also things that presently pose limitations. And in that regard, the question of transport across the seas of persons and of goods is critical. It's very interesting that Marcus Mosiah Garvey envisaged this years ago when he sought to establish alliance for shipping, and that was repugnant to the interests of the time, and in fact resulted in his incarceration. But this is one area where technology has the power to create a dynamic link, no matter the physical geographic separation which exists. And so much today of commerce and activities, particularly within the service sector, is done digitally. So that is why we place very great emphasis on developing our own technology. And this was dramatized with the advent of COVID soon after the institute was launched. Our experience as developing countries was that we were denied of vaccines because the capacity to produce those vaccines resided in countries that stockpiled them, had enough to service their own population 3 times over before we got access to any of them. And indeed, the first shipment of vaccines which reached the Caribbean came to us from the portions allotted to Cuba, to Africa, allotted to Africa, which had been guaranteed by Afrieximbank. And we couldn't have a more dramatic illustration of the value of cooperation. But also, we couldn't have a more compelling reason why we have got to develop our own technology.
All right. You've talked about quite a lot. So how has Afrieximbank, I mean, you mentioned it a wee bit, so you can expand on it. How has it contributed or moved this whole conceptualization of yours forward, particularly the current one that is ending today?
I would say without hesitation, under the visionary leadership of President Orama, the bank has recognized that if the 6-region concept of Africa is to have real meaning, there must be institutions which confine their activities not to one side of the Atlantic only, but span right across the Atlantic divide. And particularly so in the question of financing the areas which need to make effective economic cooperation a reality. And 2 years ago, Afrieximbank actually established in Barbados a branch, and it has been able to invest money, make money available for projects within the Caribbean. And it's the beginning of opening the contacts which are necessary. There have been trade associations organized by the bank where business leaders have met, and they have been able to start to initiate commercial transactions for enterprises in their particular areas of interest. I would say it has made a considerable difference. And I think, if I may just immediately insert this, we want to ensure collaboration of that kind between our universities. It once existed. In fact, my first visit to Nigeria was for an international students conference. At that time, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was the president of Nigeria. It has left a lasting impression in my own mind, and it made me recognize immediately from then what my true identity is.
Which year was that?
1957.
Okay.
So I attach very, very great importance to the people-to-people contact. And in academic exchanges, first of all, learning about our own identity. Our people need to know our history, what we achieved. And in doing so, we have to fight some hidden weapons that were used against us. And I'll take a very simple one. Black. Black is associated with most things in a pejorative sense.
Yep.
That's very, very critical why we must design our own artificial intelligence so that what we put into it is what reflects what we want, what is true. And that is essential if we are to ensure that our people understand Africa is where civilization began.
Okay, before we get down to discussing Nigeria, now you'd mentioned it, let me just chip it in immediately. The AI hub that you're talking about, what solution does it offer? You've mentioned a little bit of it, but
well, first of all, let me say, we have just launched the pilot study.
Okay.
And the aim of it is to create artificial linkages between the Caribbean and Africa. We envisage that at the start, there will be 3 centers, one in the Caribbean, one in Western Africa, and one in Eastern Africa. We have not yet identified where those centers will be. That will depend on the expressions of interest shown by governments in hosting the facilities, but also in sharing the facilities and constituting a network on which we can expand. We want to ensure that we have a system of AI which will be able to be used to facilitate trade, to facilitate learning, and where we design it, we own it, and we operate it ourselves.
So
this is the digital age.
Yeah.
It's the fourth industrial revolution. This is the fourth industrial revolution, which is going to be about technology. We can't reverse the tide. We have to be at the head of the tide, and we have to be in as much control of the flow of the tide as human ingenuity can conceive.
I'm sure talking about identity, we'll be looking at maybe doing away with things like black sheep, blackmail, and all that stuff about blacks, because we don't have white male, we don't have white sheep, we just have black male, black sheep.
Absolutely.
And all that. Okay, your ambassador, Lincoln Downer, says there's a need to review and improve on the diplomatic engagements between Jamaica and Nigeria, especially concerning air services. Nigeria's federal government has started the review of its BASA process with Jamaica to enable a direct flight arrangement between both countries. What's your sense of this?
It's an idea which has existed for quite some time now. In fact, during my tenure in office, we actually had an oil exchange arrangement between Nigeria and Jamaica. And we began to explore the possibilities of direct linkages. We have to try to move away from this triangular trade where we have to go through Europe when we are just across the pond directly. For me to get here on this occasion, I had to go to London and then travel to Nigeria. The flight time from Jamaica to Nigeria is less than the flight time to London. But it's about, when I speak about travel, I'm not only talking about travel for business. I'm talking about travel for cultural exchanges, travel. Our entertainers have already begun. Your Nigerians have been performing in the Caribbean, and in return, we have been able to perform here. I hear Bob Marley's music everywhere I go. We've got to get to know each other. In sports, to which I attach great importance, the last time our football teams were engaged, it was in London just a month or so ago, where Nigeria got the better of
Naturally,
Jamaica.
they should get the better of Jamaica because
at this time. But incidentally, we must appreciate that sports, entertainment are part of the creative industries, and that is one of the fastest growing areas of global economic growth. We have produced the talents, the quality. Remember, the only new musical instrument of the last century was the steel band from Trinidad. It shows the power that we have available to us in spurring the creative arts.
By the way, just on the side, how is reggae still doing in Jamaica?
Still more than holding its own. It's, of course, evolved into other genres. Dancehall is what now carries the swing, as we would say.
Yeah.
But reggae music has an identity of its own. You'll hear it in Japan. You will hear it in China. So we take pride in it, but so much of that is the emergence, the product of what originated from Africa. The beat, the rhythm, the power of the drums. It's expressed in our dances,
Yeah.
in our poetry, in our writings, in our paintings. So going back to the Center for Advocacy, those are all areas where we are trying to spur exchanges, and we hope we can get the private sector on both sides
To invest in that.
to invest in that.
All right, let me see how much I can get in before I let you off the hook, as it were. Nigeria, as a gas-producing country, was seen as a potential regular energy supplier for Jamaica. How has this become the case? How far?
That was a specific arrangement a few decades ago for a number of reasons. That arrangement is not presently in place, but discussions are taking place as to whether this is an area where activities can be resumed.
All right, the African Continental Free Trade aligns with your vision of a long-standing Greater South-South partnership. What's your assessment of its operation so far? Why should there be improvements?
The realization of that free trade area is comparatively recent. And of course, it has got to have some time before it really gets fully established and operational. I see, however, a clear possibility and a clear need for CARICOM, which has a free trade area, and I've actually espoused that idea in some presentations I have given since the formation of the Institute, to look at, is there not space for an arrangement between the CARICOM free trade area, the CARICOM single market, with the African free trade area. Now, we are having this second summit of Africa-Caribbean nations in Addis Ababa in September. And it is my hope that the leaders at that meeting will at least agree in principle to explore what is required and, if possible, to commission some work to be done in order for there to be an arrangement that links the Caribbean single market with the African free trade area.
My director was saying I should speak Jamaica to you. Incidentally, I don't know how to speak. I think it's patois or whatever. But just on a last note before we sign off, how's your stay been in Nigeria this 3 days? How's your stay been?
Oh, I always feel very much welcome and at home here. Over the years, I have developed personal friendships with a wide range of Nigerians, and I can't fail to say that several of the daughters of the Caribbean have been mothers in Nigeria, and that extends, of course, to the generations that follow. So when I'm in Nigeria, I feel
At home.
At home.
Yeah. All right. That's PJ Patterson, the 6th Prime Minister of Jamaica. Thank you for being on the program here on Arise News and for your stay in Nigeria. We wish you a safe journey back home when you leave.
My pleasure.
All right.